Thanks for all coming today and finding the labyrinth here to Coronado E. I'm sure it wasn't easy to get here. So my name is Lou Pugliese. I'm the Senior Innovation Fellow at ASU, and I'm starting a laboratory which is designed to be the first dedicated lab to look specifically at learning analytics and learning sciences, in particular in two areas: mainstream programs like our online ASU Online program that's been dated back to 2008, so we've got lots of data. And then looking forward in the industry and focus specifically on adaptive learning, competency-based education, machine, whatever we want to call it, and we'll talk about that today. So we're really deeply invested in the advancement of next generation platforms. And so we brought with us here a number of panel members who are experts in the field. Some of them are practitioners, some of those are developers of software, some of those write and analyze the systems that are in the marketplace today. And so we think you'll have a really good expert team to talk about and banter around in terms of the subject. So the session's goal is really, frankly, at the end of the day, to start a dialogue about where we are in the industry on these next generation systems that show a lot of promise in the industry, but are still relatively nascent in the marketplace. And so we really want to try to start a dialogue and then carry this through to action and try to get our arms around this industry. One of the tenets that we're looking at specifically is in the action lab, moving from action to the analytics side, the reports, the data reporting, and then moving to specifically R&D. And we think as an industry, now that I'm on the other side at ASU as opposed to into the vendor community, that there's an increasing gap that's the chasm that's moving in the opposite direction that we want it to move in. So this dialogue is sort of meant to say, okay, how do we look at a private sector approach of getting our arms around this and making sense of the marketplace? And so just to set the stage to start, we know that we're at this inflection point in data science. It's moved very, very rapidly in the last 3 to 5 years. And we've got the ability to understand individuals, students, lifelong learners, and their talents and their abilities in ways that we haven't ever done before. And the technologies drive us in that direction. But you juxtapose that with kind of where we were 15 years ago. We engineered our current systems for only one market, and that's 4-year undergraduate education. So now we've got this inflection of new technology that shows a lot of promise, that's very rich data-driven, but a design currently today that's frankly outdated. And so the undergraduate degree is basically less than 20% of the entire learning population. So we've got to figure out how we move to the next generation systems and how we get from here to there. And in a rational market, and obviously some will understand that higher education can be irrational at times, but in a rational market, in those private sector markets, they figure out how to do this. But it's not going to be easy in terms of where we're coming from after having spent 15 years in a platform where, frankly, faculty and systems have now just gotten in place, and now we're throwing another technology down the pipeline. And so what we're here to do is just sort of look at what the future might look like based on what we see today. And so I'm going to ask each one of you to introduce yourselves and then answer a question, and then we'll go down the line one question. So there's a great deal of confusion about what we call this thing. What is it? Adaptive learning, machine learning, all kinds of personal learning statements. And so, there's no really common language here that we need to talk about, and this is one of the things we need to get our arms around is. So the question is, with all these titles, at their core, I think what we're trying to achieve is a one-to-one state. We're trying to achieve an individualized path for individualized learners. And so if you look at where we are in the marketplace today, how do you distinguish one product from another? John, you can start.
How do you distinguish one product from another?
You have to introduce yourself and tell you who you are. And,
Great. Okay. So my name is John Mott. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Learning Objects. We're a division of Cengage Learning. And as you think about how you distinguish these products. I think what we end up in an alphabet soup. A lot of times, when we talk to potential clients or current clients, they're at a loss to make a distinction between personalized learning, adaptive learning, algorithm-driven learning, competency-based learning. And so at least how I would try to distinguish products is I come back to a pretty simple notion of we get students in some state of being relative to the learning goals that we have for them or that they're trying to pursue. We need to measure where they stand relative to their goals at that starting point and then as they move forward. So what is their state relative to their goals? How do we measure it? And then based on that measurement, we want to have some set of rules or maybe algorithms that help us decide what's the next best thing for them. And as you kind of go back in the lore of learning science, some of the early stuff around differentiated instruction, we used to have teachers and tutors that would do this, right? They would say, oh, I'm helping this student learn math or Latin or whatever, and they would do some probing and find out where they were and guide them on the path. And I think now that the technology has evolved, we can say, okay, my student is in this position, I measure it, I know with some precision where they are, and now I'm going to apply some rules that create a new learning plan or the next best step for them. If I were you and I were thinking about how to distinguish between products, I would dig in on, well, how are you testing and what are you using to decide what's important to test? Because a lot of times we start with the testing and the algorithms before maybe we even know what we care about is that we're trying to push the student toward. So let's start there. And then what's inside that box that's the personalization rule or the algorithm? I think really being able to interrogate that with a vendor and having really good answers come back is critical.
Great. Adam.
Thank you. Adam Newman, managing partner of Tyton Partners. We are a strategy consulting and investment banking firm exclusively focused on the education sector, working with companies and organizations at growth inflection points. We have been active in looking at the adaptive ecosystem probably going back to 2008 and 2009, and have had a lot of exposure both to institutions grappling with the concept of adaptive and what it means within what they're trying to achieve, to John's comments around learner outcomes and sort of program objectives, and also spending a lot of time with the supplier ecosystem. I will do a shameless plug. We just published some updated work that we've been doing in this space that actually, to Lou, your point, actually deconstructs about 22 providers in the marketplace right now against a taxonomy of criteria that we've identified that are not meant to identify sort of good or bad, but more to sort of articulate and facilitate a discussion around what are you as an institution trying to achieve in your environment, your teaching and learning environment, and what types of attributes or experiences do the solutions in the marketplace enable. Because if you're looking for something that's a study aid and that's supplemental to a core course, there's a fundamentally different ecosystem of what you might be looking at than if you're looking to do whole course redesign. And so a lot of the work we've done has been to try to sort of demystify and debunk the intersection. And so I'll just leave it at that and say, take a look at some of the work that's available right now.
Great, thanks. David.
I'm David Kuntz. I'm the Chief Research Officer at Knewton. I've been with Knewton since its early days, and my background is in psychometrics and measurement. And adaptivity and adaptive learning, there are a lot of things that it is not that I think it's important to address right up front. If you get a letter from the Publishers Clearinghouse and it says, "Dear Lou, you may have already won," that's not personalized. It pretends to be personalized. It's making out to be about you, but it's really not about you. And similarly, if you're working with a learning system, it says if you choose option B, you and everyone else who chooses option B are going to get sent over to look at this material over here. It's also not personalized. It's just following a rule, behaving in a particular way for everybody who does that thing. So I really think about it much like perhaps journalism, kind of the 5 W's, right? What should the student get? What should the student be doing? Why should they be doing it? When is the right time for them to do it? in what form should they receive it, how, and the who is of critical importance. That is, it is that student, that particular student that you're answering those questions for, and not students like them or students who are like someone else. That's my take.
Great, thanks. Mike?
I'm Michael Feldstein. I'm a co-publisher of the eLiterate family of EdTech analysis publications and partner in MindWires Consulting. Before I answer the question, I want to give you, for lack of a better term, a bullshit test that I hope that you will apply to all of us throughout this entire, throughout this entire conference, really. I want you to think about 3 courses that you have taken in college. I want you to think about your first college math course. I want you to think about your English composition course. And I'd like you to think about one other course that is preferably not either of those, preferably one that changed your life. The one that when you think back, you think that was the best course I took in college. And I want you to think in detail about what was required of you in those courses, what you had to do, what was hard, what was easy, what were the tasks, right? When we talk about personalizing learning, when we talk about adapting learning, talking about different adaptive learning problems is saying, adaptive learning products is saying, well, I need to buy a vehicle. Well, okay, what do you need the vehicle for? Are you taking your family on vacation? Are you transporting goods? Are you transporting a lot of cargo or a little cargo? Are you transporting cargo locally or across the country? Is it perishable cargo? Does it need to be refrigerated? Right? Whether it is adaptive or personalized in ways that matter or are meaningful really depends on what is the educational task in front of you. Are you in English comp, math, or that other course? Right? So, and the corollary to that is, I know that all you finance folks want there to be unicorns here. Education is the most highly vertical market in human history, okay? There are a few horizontal plays. If you want to think about adaptive learning in terms of that, David's company essentially sells regenerative braking systems that are going to be useful in a whole bunch of different kinds of vehicles. There are some horizontal plays. But teaching is about humans. Humans are individual. Individuals are not horizontal. So there is no answer to your question, I'm afraid.
Seriously? That's a long way of skirting the issue. Which you do often, by the way. He's a writer.
All right, bring it.
He's a writer.
Michael's ready now.
I prefer to say you're asking the wrong question.
Okay, well, that's okay. We can talk about that offline. So to your point, Michael, in terms of putting yourself in a course environment,
Yeah.
what I'm really interested in, because I have, I get this Google alert, and every day I have to take it off. It's driving me crazy because every day it's 50 messages of personalized learning or adaptive learning. But it tells me that there's a whole lot of activity going on in the marketplace. And so what I want to know what's real.
Yeah.
Can you guys tell us a story for the group about what you feel early on has worked in your situation? Now, in your case, David, real customer cases. In yours, customer cases or others. Or what you've written about or studied or seen in a use case have you put pen to paper to. So why don't we just start and just talk a little bit about what the reality is. David, why don't you go ahead and start?
Sure. So, adaptive learning requires participation in order for it to work. One of our experiences with ASU, for example, I had some very successful outcomes in terms of reducing withdrawal rates and increasing student passing rates for a math readiness course. But one of the things that it required was buy-in from the administration, buy-in from the faculty, and a willingness on the part of both to think about new ways of working with their students in order to achieve their particular goals. With that particular course, in fact, we found that there was a strong correlation between the degree to which administration and faculty were willing to do that and the results that were achieved. And that's not a surprise because, as you point out, education is about humans, and interaction between humans. And there's just no great way to do that purely in isolation. I did want to point out, and I realize that this is a post-secondary panel, but some of our partners are in higher ed, some of them are in K-12. And one of our partners in particular has been posting some really terrific results that they've seen in school district after school district who's been using their product. And again, what they have found there is when the teachers take the time to rethink what they're going to do with all this new data that they have, when they rethink how students interact with the application and with the other students based on this new paradigm, they see really great results.
Great. John?
Yeah, so kind of picking up on both of those threads about the human element of this. There's been some mention at this conference, and there's some kind of resurrection of some of the research that Benjamin Bloom did in the late 80s around individual tutors and how much better students perform when they have one-on-one tutors. In fact, it's in repeated studies, 2 standard deviations better than students who learn in a traditional teacher at the front of the classroom environment. And since then, there's been a lot of focus on creating intelligent tutoring systems. And can we come up with almost an AI-like tutor that can sit by the side of the student and help them through this? And so, some of those have been marginally successful, but others have been colossal failures. And I think where we're kind of converging, and I'll get to examples here really quick,
Okay.
is when you can pair good data with engaged human teachers and tutors, I think that's where the real magic happens.
Yeah.
So for example, if I'm teaching a section of Psych 101 and I've got 400 students, maybe there's some adaptive or personalized homework that I'm doing that's helping me learn the building blocks. But the teacher now can go, oh, I have 400 students, and today Jimmy and Susie are struggling with this. I know exactly when and how to intervene. Or I can go, hey, 80–90% of the class is okay on this topic, but nobody's getting this one. Maybe I need to do a supplementary lecture. So I think in the things that we're seeing, it's when you find the right mix of adaptivity and computer-guided learning paired with good instruction.
Yeah, great. You didn't get to your example.
What's that?
You didn't get to your example.
Oh, example. So just in a recent pilot, that exact scenario with a client, limited end so far, but exactly that scenario. Students do pre-tests at the beginning of each module. It filters their learning plan for that module. Students then know how to kind of self-guide themselves through that module. The instructor's looking at data about how students are doing across all of the modules, intervening where appropriate. Small end, but 5 to 10 percentage points lift in completion and drops in retention. I mean, increases in retention. Drop in retention would be bad.
Yeah, so it would be bad. Yeah. So, any observations from you guys?
I mean, I would say, American Intercontinental University, whole course redesign across 90 courses, about 350 faculty, underpinned with an adaptive platform, right? Which I think to unicorns, right, is an example of probably an adaptive implementation that's a unicorn in the space. University of Central Florida, another organization, really strong instructional design and IT shop that has gone relatively broad and wide scale. Getting back to your comment about products, I think it's a different type of adaptive offering, but if you look at, the LearnSmart solutions, the MyLab solutions, which have forms of adaptivity, you look at the number of students and institutions that are using those. Yeah. Right? I mean, so it's a nuanced question. I think, again, it all comes back to context is critical, and what you're trying to achieve. But those are a handful that I think are worth looking at and thinking about.
Great. Michael?
University of Central Florida is an outstanding example. And one of the reasons that they have gotten such great success is because they have one of the finest, most practical ed schools in the country that works directly with faculty on faculty research. So the faculty go in with these adaptive programs, both on individual levels and on departmental levels and at school levels, to test and figure out what works in their context. You have both, right? I can rattle off half a dozen different examples of where adaptive learning works well with developmental math, right? Anywhere where there's a clear pattern of achieving a right answer, even better, where a pattern of wrong answers tells you something clear about what the student isn't getting, is a good candidate for adaptive learning. Lou, you talked about the fact that this 4-year degree that we are all focused on because it's what we grew up with is a minority of education. If you're not looking for those life-changing courses, if you're not looking in an area where you're trying to teach people to be thinkers and citizens and so on, they just need to get a skill so they can move up in their job, those are often good candidates for adaptive learning, right? Any kind of straightforward process, but surprising places too. So I'll give a non-standard example. This is not adaptive, but it is personalized. Middlebury College teacher, there's a gen ed course there in GIS, Global Geographical Information Systems, which the professor correctly says is a little bit like teaching a course in calculators. What he's really teaching is spatial reasoning. And it turns out that almost nobody teaches spatial reasoning to K through 12 students. So you come in with a diversity, with a broad range of talent and skills based on what those students' individuals' experience and proclivities are, which is exactly the same problem that you have in developmental math in Essex County, Newark, New Jersey. You have some kids who come in there with 4th grade math skills and some kids who come in there who are just a few critical skills short of passing and everything in between, right? So what you need to do is push the broadcast of information out. In the case of the GIS professor, he just made YouTube videos of his lectures and spent more time talking to his students in the class, right? So either you're using these personalized learning technologies to increase the value of the time between the student and the teacher in that kind of environment, or in an environment where that human value isn't as high because the bar of what you're trying to teach them isn't as high. You just want to get them through some procedural knowledge and it can stand on its own. Those are all good candidates where we're seeing success today.
Hey Michael,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just a quick question though.
Yeah.
What was the personalized learning technology in that case?
Video.
YouTube
Yeah.
is personalized learning technology? See, that's part
No.
of...
There you go.
No.
That's part of the problem.
So let's distinguish between personalized learning and adaptive learning. We have been throwing those terms around as if they're the same thing. And this is not like, we at eLiterate and MindWires, when we think about these, we've tried to divide these into separate things. Personalized learning is a set of teaching practices to us. And it would be better described as undepersonalized teaching, right? We've all been in classes for whatever reason, not every student was engaged. In fact, I would guess that almost every class we've ever been in has had some students who haven't been engaged. And not always for horrible reasons. It's not because it's a 500-person class. It's not because the student was horrible. This just happens for 100 different reasons, right? So that we see 3 different approaches that instructors tend to take with the support of technology. 1, move content broadcast out of the classroom. That is a personalized learning technique, and you can do it with YouTube. 2, make homework time contact time. You can do that with analytics that are not adaptive. I just need to know what you're doing at home so that when you come into class as a group and as individuals, I can have a better sense of whether I can move on or you need more help on. The third thing is for those areas like math, like memorization of stuff, where the computer is a good tutor, that's where that's a third personalized learning teaching technique. 2 of those 3 can be accomplished with courseware that is not adaptive. The third requires adaptivity, and it remains to be seen from context to context which of those has the largest effect size in terms of impact on education.
Yeah, well, so personalized, it's obviously nomenclature, and I don't want to, start down that rabbit hole in terms of talking about what is what and what do you call things, but At the end of the day, personalized learning, in my view, in terms of the applications that have been used with what they call personalized learning, is adaptive in the sense that it's attempting to address an individual course to an individual's learning style, individual's progression. In other words, a one-to-one type of scenario. But you're disagreeing with that according to your
Well,
definition.
the amount of time that I need to absorb a lecture is a personalization feature. Some people need to hear it once, some people need to hear it twice, some people need to hear it 5 times.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, got it. John?
I would just tack on to that when I think about personalization, we have a myth of sameness, right? If we're talking about higher education, we have this myth that students come in at the same starting point. They're going to start the same courses on the same date. They're going to work on the same lessons at the same pace for 14 or 15 weeks, and somehow they're going to hit the same finish line at the same time. Well, because that never happens, we just sort them out with grades and let them move on or not. But what we're really talking about here is we got to figure out where does each student start. So there's a starting point that will be different for every student. And then from there, different students are going to move at different paces on different paths. And so I would agree with Michael's point that, whether you call it personalization or adaptivity, it's like each learner has a different starting point. They're going to move at a different pace, different path. Some of that takes sophisticated technology. If I'm churning through a whole bunch of math problems or technical terms,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
But sometimes I get stuck in my history class because I'm not a good writer. And the rule is I should go to the writing center. I probably don't need an algorithm for that.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, this is a great academic discussion. I think the problem with this market is we have to stop having these conversations and start figuring out how we get folks to engage in what's available to them, right?
Exactly.
And I think that on both the supply side, right, and on the institutional side, there's culpability in terms of, regardless of whether it's adaptive or MOOCs or CBE or pick your innovation of choice, right? And here we're talking about adaptivity. How do we as a system get ourselves to engage in these opportunities, right? Because we could spend the next hour with platitudes about what we think adaptivity can bring or not to the table, but we have to get beyond sort of the inaction of what it is and figure out how to move to the action of how we do it in a way that's meaningful.
It's like, how do we solve immediate problems for students right now where they are with the tools
But
we have?
I guess I would argue that it's very difficult to move beyond that when no one has any idea what it is. And if you if it's perfectly okay to call that letter from Publishers Clearinghouse personalized, right? Then, and it's okay to call YouTube personalized because I can watch that video 3 times if I want to, right? I think we really lose something in the communication.
But we're in an emergent market where everybody's going to wrap themselves in a mantle that they see fit, and if we are the word police, or the sort of if we spend too much time trying to define it in a vacuum, as opposed to having sort of institutions and the stakeholders define it for themselves, I think that's I think where we need to get to.
Okay, I agree with you, with everything except the word platitude. So I think we keep conflating product features with educational needs. They are entirely different. Okay, personalized learning. Just take a minute and think about what those 2 words actually mean. First of all, they're nonsensical. You can't have depersonalized learning. Learning is what you do. Teaching is what we do for you. You can have personal or unpersonal teaching, right? Learning is a process. And if you take YouTube or flashcards or pencil and paper to make it work for you or your child, that is personalized learning. If you want to talk about what product features enable learning that works for students, and you want to say, well, within that universe, let's talk about workforce education. Let's talk about time to graduation in community colleges. Let's talk about, right, let's solve a particular educational problem. Then we can have a meaningful conversation, and I don't really give a crap about whether we call it adaptive or personalized or Joe, right? But let's make sure that we're talking about real problems and not just skipping to the features, because features are meaningless. I don't like regenerative braking doesn't do me any good if I don't have a need to drive anywhere.
So I want to shift gears a little bit off the terminology thing, because we could argue that all day. So I think we would all agree that, you know, look, the stakes are pretty high here, at least in the early days with these new technologies, and some success rates, some failure rates, but the allure and the promise looks pretty high, right? I'm real interested in a world where, you know, we can map the human genome, but we can't map human potential. Or in a world where, you know, our data systems, you know, why can't we, are so sophisticated, why can't we do this? Well, in theory, we can, right? So if we do this right, and we all get our arms around this thing, we solve the #1 problem that's in education for 300 years, and that is, you know, how do you teach to 30 different learning nervous systems in a classroom, right? So, and that to me is the end game here. Is, you know, how do you do that? And there's all kinds of accelerated learning and economic impacts to that. So what I want to bridge to is, how do we think about the science of how these systems are built? What's the black box? What needs to be on the inside? I mean, if I'm an investor looking at investing in your company, or if I'm, you know, a CTO at a university looking at the platform itself, what are the essentials of what that black box needs to have? I'm not asking you to give up trade secrets or anything like that, but when you go about engineering systems, what do you think about in terms of making these things work?
All right. Well, like I said earlier, what is it that the student needs, right? And when do they need it? In what form do they need it? Those are critical questions that black box needs to address. And it needs to address them, and it matters that it addresses it for the specific student. If your goal is, we want to do as much for all of our students as we can, right? So, I mean, just as an example, how many students are there at ASU, roughly speaking? 80,000,
yeah,
give or take.
Yeah.
So, if I have a system that's based on rules that are effective, say, for 80% of the population, another way of thinking about that is that's 16,000 students at ASU that rule doesn't make sense for, right? And so if I'm looking at that black box, one of the things that would be really important for me is that black box is doing something specific for each individual student. It's taking their history into account, not just what they've done, because I can make a lot of rules about what they've done that may not make any sense for them. Not just what they've done, but the things that are important to infer from that, like, to what extent will giving them this to work on, this activity or this task, change their engagement? To what extent are they prepared to learn this new concept or that new concept? Taking into account those kinds of things, as well as the particular learning objectives that they face and the amount of time that they have to do it, the amount of time that that particular student tends to learn this kind of concept or that kind of concept compared to Johnny or Sue. All of those kinds of inferences are really, really important in being able to make the right influence for this particular student right now in order to achieve those outcomes. For me, that's what's got to be inside that box.
Okay. John, what do you guys think about?
I would change it to a transparent box and say that's one of the challenges is when students and teachers don't know what's in the box. Sometimes it creates a sense of unease or distrust, or like there's a lack of confidence that this black box is helping me get to where I need to go. And what I would say is, it's exactly the same questions. What does the student need? When do they need it? How do they need it? But exposing that to them, sometimes it can be information overload, but I think by and large, helping students and respecting their agency and the agency of the instructor to see, well, what is the system telling me and why? And is there more than one choice? Because maybe there's, let's go with an algorithm that says there's a 98% chance that this is the best thing, but there's a 95% chance that this is the best thing. Well, show me both, let me pick, right?
Yeah.
I think some transparency there. Yeah. Well, what are the components? Absolutely backward design. So you have to have really good backward design between your goals, your assessments, and your outcomes. But then taking into account, things like we know students need regular, frequent feedback. They need reinforcement. They need good, authentic assessment. They need practical ways to apply what they're learning in more complicated ways so the building blocks add up, right? So it's good, solid instructional design, but in a transparent box rather than a black one.
Got it.
So Lou, building on that, I mean, I think that, whether it's a black box or a transparent box, I think, and no discredit, I mean, it's the tremendous amount of hard work that goes into that box is, I think from a market standpoint, if we don't move from that to then thinking about how these solutions fit seamlessly in the hands of the students and the faculty members, we can spend a lot of time on the black box and the transparent box and it won't matter. Yep. And I think it's critical as we think about where the market is right now, we've got to move from the black box, transparent box, into the field, right? And make sure that these solutions, we're leveraging everything we're able to put in this box.
Right. Yeah.
For practitioners, for students, for administrators in a way that fits within their workflow, right? Rather than having them, have to reorient themselves to the black box has to fit seamlessly.
Let me just, if I may.
Yeah.
So, if we assume that everything is working great today, then I think it would also make sense to assume that no reorientation would be required, right? But if we believe that things aren't actually working great all of the time today, and part of the reason for these technologies and these approaches is a recognition of that and an attempt to solve for that, then it seems to me some reorientation is going to be necessary. There's no free lunch here, right? Teachers and students both, and administration as well, need to reorient a little bit at least in order to take advantage of these and to see the benefits.
I agree, right, fundamentally. And if you juxtapose K-12 relative to post-secondary, there's a culture of sort of professional development broadly defined in K-12 that does not exist in higher ed, which is a huge gap,
Yes.
right? So I think, yes, totally agree, David, that we need to reorient and folks need to change practice, but we all have our workflows, right? And we know that when we introduce things into our workflows, yes, we have to shift a little bit, but if we have to shift too much, it's not going to work.
No, that's right. I mean, you can't do it all at once.
And so we still have to calibrate, and I think we're still in this sort of calibration phase regarding adaptive and other innovations. You have to calibrate, the spectrum of flexibility that exists within the current practice and what we're able to support, and then what we need to sort of break.
So just one quick example of a shift. Is that all right, Will?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that we haven't talked about yet is what happens above the course. And it's great to have adaptivity and personalization inside courses, but a lot of what we talk about in terms of retention and persistence is getting students to move from one course to the next.
Yeah.
And if in our box we don't take into account the bigger picture of the student and the changing roles that faculty and institutions have to think about to move from a course-centric model to a program-centric model, we're missing the picture.
So I'll answer my own question. How about that? Okay. So we at ASU we're running around 26,000 students for the last 2 years through about 3 to 5 adaptive platforms. And we're learning a lot. I mean, we're still not there yet, and part of the charge of the Action Lab here is going to be looking at what is the black box and what's the solutions that you put together that scientifically are correct in their execution, right? So my observation is very specifically, because I've had to pitch to 100 investors and then ask these questions, very specifically, it deals with 3 domains. It deals with the content domain in terms of how content is organized and tagged and how content relates to each other, how is it peer-reviewed, those types of things. It relates to the assessment stack that's focused on formative, summative, high stakes, low stakes, diagnostic, which happens in real time, and whether that's psychometrically accurate, and David, you would appreciate that correctly. And then an outcomes framework, some sort of referenceable framework that through the progress, the system can regulate itself according to the outcome stack. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense. I'd like to give an answer that complements that I have given to a very different audience, and that I think picks up on the theme, the tension of change management, and that we've all been talking about. I had the good fortune to be asked by the American Federation of Teachers to write an explanation of adaptive learning for their higher ed newsletter. Most of the rest of that issue was taken up with how horrible MOOCs are and how they're going to destroy the planet. Now, you know, look, fairness, it was 2012. MOOCs were pretty horrible then. And there was at least a 5% chance that they might destroy the planet. What I said was, which doesn't contradict any of the underpinnings you just described. Think the potential of adaptive learning in the context of a traditional university, college or university environment. Think of it as changing the economics of tutoring. Right now, it's economically impossible to give every student a one-to-one tutor, right? This gets to the 2 sigma problem, right? But when we use the word tutor in American parlance, that means something fairly specific. It means someone who's not as expert as the teacher. It's someone who can help you with certain aspects of your homework. You know, if you're a responsible faculty member or teacher, you vet your tutors, you train your tutors, you coach your tutors, you oversee them. You know what they can help students with and what they can't help students with, right? Nevertheless, if you had tutors with realistic expectations of what they could do, and you could send one home with every student, and then in the morning, like the cobbler's elves, before you woke up, they all got together and they put together a report for you of everything they observed of every student. How would that change what you would do in the classroom? What would you do now that you can't do? What would you not do now that you have to do? Right? That is the potential, not talking about personalized learning, but specifically of adaptive learning. And because we all trust those tutors differently in different domains, the answer is different, right? Because those interactions of those elements, when the tutor is trying to help a student write an essay, is very different than when they're trying to teach a student how to balance a binomial equation, solve a binomial equation.
Yep, got it. So we have about 7 minutes left. I've got 2 questions to follow up on, to your point, Michael. So one, this is tough, moving from A to B, moving from first-gen systems to second-gen systems. To me, when you try to implement this at scale, it's like BPR. It's like business process reengineering for schools.
That's
right?
Exactly what it is.
So how do you do that? I mean, have you experienced that BPR process in terms of getting adoption and trying to get it to scale?
That's your unicorn.
No. Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
That is my fondest wish, is that I will come back to this conference in 2017. And the big theme of this conference will be, how do we create cultural change management on campuses, right? Because we have 2 fantasies that are hopefully dying now. One is that somebody will invent an iPhone app that will make universities obsolete. The other is that universities are fine and nothing needs to change, right? Now that those ideas are dying, let's get down to the real work, and the real work involves humans. And all of this great software, and I know what John's company is doing. I know what Knewton's doing. There are a lot of smart people working on this. their ability to impact education is limited until we can solve this problem, and there is no easy answer to it.
And Lou, I would building on that, and if we think about, if we juxtapose how much our institutional community spends on administrative technologies and the scaffolding and support to make sure that the ERP is up, right? The HR system, the finance system, the SIS, right? The card reader, right? All the things that have nothing to do with teaching and learning. If we juxtapose the spend on institutional campuses relative to teaching and learning investments, we're so out of whack, it's unbelievable, right? It's 10 cents on the dollar,
Absolutely, no question.
right? So unless and until, and I've been in events where you have CIOs who get exposed to sort of the innovations in teaching and learning, and they sort of wake up and say, wow, is this part of my portfolio?
Yeah.
Right? And so unless and until as a system, again, the thing that's just crazy, the core of an institution is teaching and learning. And yet, again, pennies on the dollar, we're so underinvested in these things, so
100%.
we won't see it in 2017, we won't see it in 2027 until we start to create some more equilibrium in how we allocate. And they're exemplars,
100%.
right? I mean, what you guys do at ASU and other institutions, but the vast majority of institutions are out of whack.
Agreed, and that's a perennial problem. I think one of the things that I look at when I look at all these solutions is that you want to keep the authoring process and the process of developing the course as close to home as you can, right, to a faculty member. And it seems like the market we're in right now is still nascent in an environment where the vendor community has to do it for them. And that's troubling to me in terms of the trajectory that we need to have to develop more intelligent authoring systems around this, for instance. And I Learning Objects has done a lot of work in this particular area, because it's one thing to author to a standard mainstream course. It's another thing to use complicated content connections and put that in an adaptive box. It's hard to do that. And so that's one troubling area that I see happening. So.
Well, to that point, one of the biggest challenges that you rightly note is when you talk about personalized or adaptive learning, there's got to be some consensus amongst the faculty members who are overseeing that and implementing it, that for this program, we have a common set of learning outcomes that we're all going to teach to, and in our courses, we're going to make sure that all of our courses roll up to that, and that we're going to start measuring things in a pretty similar, if not exact same way. So that's business process management, on steroids.
Right.
Especially with faculty, to get them to agree on that. But there are changes happening, and the places that we're seeing that are where there are programs or institutions where, for whatever reason, the forces and the culture have started to shift away from my course, leave me alone. That's been a lot of the culture in higher ed, is I teach my course in my class, leave me alone, to now the faculty members coming together and say, oh, there's 5 of us that teach this class, and there's 20 of us that teach this program. We need to own that together. As that process starts to happen, I think we'll naturally start to see some of those barriers come down.
It's an evolution, for sure.
I mean, how many industries do you know where the CEO commonly will come in and say, I'm going to give you some new KPRs, but those KPRs have nothing to do with anything you have been trained with in your professional development. Your compensation is in no way based on your ability to meet those KPRs, and we're not providing you with any support. In fact, we're going to punish you if you focus time on those KPRs rather than on these other KPRs. That is exactly the situation we're in with higher ed. How many pedagogy courses has the average faculty member had? 0. And when I say average, I mean 98%. 0. Not even on ed tech. Pedagogy, how to teach. They learned how to teach because they sat through, 20,000 years of education to get to where they were going to be. And they're not paid to learn to be better teachers. They're not compensated. There's no credit or glory in that. That, to your point earlier, nothing's going to change big until we fix that.
Great. So really quickly, we've got 1 minute, and so it's got to be a sound bite, especially for you, Michael.
You know I don't do shorts.
Yeah, of course. So So we're at the opposite of two extremes again. We as consumers at universities and the vendor community as a supply organization, we have lots of institutional research that could be really, really useful. I mean, John Anderson at Carnegie Mellon's been doing cognitive tutors for 20 years. How do we organize this in a way that makes sense to get it to its potential so that, you know, it is really, it's like a private sector environment would adopt a new technology. So real quick.
Do what UCF does, or ASU. Pick one of the models. There are a few.
Okay.
I would say go big. Just go big, right? The more data that you have, the more connected your courses are, the more you can leverage this to change the outcomes. Every student going through every course that they're in interacts with every other course at every other learning situation.
So you can call Michael Crow and tell him to go big. Right?
Yes,
Right.
that's what I'm going to do.
Adam.
How do you create real incentives to change practice, right? Lots of different levers,
Yeah.
lots of different models.
Yeah.
But how do you create incentives for the folks at the front line to
Yeah.
change practice
Yeah.
and to experiment?
Focus on students as degree and credential pursuers, not as course takers, and optimize the workflow at that level for them to be successful.
Awesome. Hey guys, I want to thank you very much for coming today. I really appreciate it.